Hey Optimancers, Chris here. So, Tasha's Cauldron of Everything came out last week, and now I've had a little bit of time to absorb it. And as I mentioned in my video last week, I will be going over pretty much everything in Tasha's with a fine-tooth comb in the weeks to come. But I have been requested to just go over what I think of Tasha's and kind of give an overview as to what's in the book and my opinions on it and the themes that show up and how the mechanics of the game are affected overall by Tasha's in its entirety. So that's what I'm going to be doing for today's video. So let's get started. So first off, do I like Tasha's Cauldron of Everything? And the answer is yeah, I think it's a pretty good book. I'm not convinced it is as good as Xanathar's Guide to Everything, but it's in the same category for me. A very strong book overall, with a lot of great options, and I do think this is really going to change the game moving forward, much as Xanathar's did. And I like that too because I always like the idea of games being fresh, new ideas being explored, and new options for characters. And Tasha's gives you all of that in spades. So when it comes to the mechanics, let's talk about the kinds of things that Tasha's is going to bring to the game. Because there are some mechanical themes we see over and over in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. The first one is pets. Pets are super common in this book. And by pets, I mean pretty much any little creature or effect or thing that your character controls, separate from your character itself, that can take actions either on your turn or another turn. Now, pets are fun, but they are also time consuming. So, as a player and a DM, you should expect the rounds of combat to take more time in a post-Tasha's D&D world, as your players are going to have to decide what to do with these pets each round. It takes a little bit of time to go from what is my PC going to do and now what is my pet going to do. But from rangers to bards to druids and so on, we are going to see a lot more pets in the hands of player characters. The second thing that is a huge theme in Tasha's is things to do with your bonus action. Before this book, you kind of had to look for ways to use your bonus action, especially if you wanted to make an attack with it. That's no longer the case. Largely, this is done through pets that pretty much all need to use your bonus action to attack now. But regardless, expect to have some easy avenues to make bonus action attacks. If two-weapon fighting wasn't dead already, it is definitely dead now. Now, Crossbow Expert, Polar Master, I think they'll survive Tasha's because the ability to combine these feats, bonus action attacks, with Sharpshooter and Great Weapon Master allow greater damage potential through these routes using your bonus action attack. But if you just want to make an attack with your bonus action, Tasha's has tons of options for you. And if you want to do healing with your bonus action, Tasha's has options for you. If you want to provide temporary hit points to your allies with your bonus actions, Tasha's has options for you. Lots of things to do. No matter what your player character is, if you're going through Tasha's, good chance your bonus action is something that you're going to be able to use regularly. The third main mechanical theme I see in Tasha's is temporary hit points. There are a lot of routes to gain temporary hit points in this book. Currently, the one getting all the attention is the Twilight Sanctuary feature of the Twilight Domain Cleric, and that is the premier temporary hit point provider by a long shot, in my opinion. But granting and gaining temporary hit points is pretty common throughout this book. The fourth mechanical concept we see come up a lot in this book is roll a die, and then you add it to the effect against a single target. We see multiple applications of this in this book. Add a die to the damage of one target. Add a die to the healing of one target. When you attack or heal someone, there's a good chance you're going to roll a die and add it. The fifth main mechanical theme that I see come up in Tasha's is you can customize more than ever, and you could make changes you never could before. If you are finding a feature or an option not working for your character as you'd hoped it would, then there are now mechanics built in to help you make changes. Now, generally, myself as a DM, I allow changes to characters when a player's not happy with their character build because I want the players to have fun, right? But as a player, I appreciate this is built in now. And the sixth main mechanical theme here is Wizards of the Coast apparently really wanted to boost Clerics and Sorcerers. I don't know if they are the classes that needed the big boosts. In fact, I would have argued they weren't classes that needed big boosts, but the subclasses for these classes seem to be miles above the existing subclass options, and no other class made out as well when it comes to the subclasses presented. So those are the major themes I see in Tasha's. Let's talk a little bit about just the takeaways I had from this book. And the first one is the effects of racial customization. Every class guide that discusses racial options, or every consensus on how the races work well for certain classes, they're all now obsolete. If custom origins are used, all these previous opinions have no standing anymore. The initial response seems to be that this means like a wonderful world where all races are good for all classes, and that would be great if that was the case, and I understand why people are jumping to that conclusion. I don't think that's the case at all. It's just the best races for every class are now different. Every class now can get medium armor proficiency as a racial ability without having to sacrifice their starting primary ability score. This is something that is going to be hard to ignore if you're making a bard or a wizard. Tasha's also has something for a custom lineage, so rules to make a race that it isn't covered in the game so far. And this custom lineage option, it's now the premier race in Dungeons & Dragons when it comes to mechanical strength. Mechanically, it is stronger than the variant human, and that's a high bar. As much as we saw certain races fitting better into certain classes before this, we're going to see that a lot more now, not less. The second takeaway I've had as Tasha's has started to seep in is that party optimization, as in not how powerful is your character or any singular character, but what piece does your character bring to the whole, is now going to be more impactful on a campaign. DMs are going to need to make adjustments for party composition, as challenge rating is going to be even more of a subjective guideline at best. Some parties are going to walk over challenges that were supposed to be hard, or even deadly, while others will still have difficulty. When you have groups of players who are figuring out who of us is granting temporary hit points to everyone, who is boosting initiative, which boosts stack with which, these questions, if answered by your players during the planning of their characters, may more than ever change the effectiveness as the group as a whole. My third main takeaway from Tasha's is that spells got even better than they were before. And this was a bit unexpected, because this is a book that actually doesn't offer a whole lot of new spells. But we now have items that boost the difficulty class of spells up to +3, and +1 difficulty class is now available with uncommon items. This is a big boost for spellcasting and creates an even bigger divide between spellcasters and non-spellcasters in the game. So bit by bit, the non-spellcasters in Dungeons & Dragons are becoming more and more irrelevant. My fourth main takeaway is that there are a lot of reprints here. We have the Artificer Alchemist, Artillerist, Battlesmith, the College of Eloquence Bard, the Order Domain Cleric, the Circle of Spores Druid, the Oath of Glory Paladin, the Bladesong Wizard. We've seen all these subclasses in other books. However, them being in one book that isn't a setting book probably will make them available in a lot of campaigns where they weren't previously. Same goes with things like spells like Booming Blade or Green Flame Blade. So we are going to see a lot of the subclasses that weren't available universally start to become available, and we're going to see them in play more and more. My fifth main takeaway is power creep is real. And power creep is basically a term we use to talk about the life of a role-playing game and how as source books come out, the player characters get more and more powerful. And this is absolutely going to be the case with Tasha's. Now, that said, I think there is no question that some of the most powerful options for players, whether it's feats or spells, remain in the player's handbook, the very first book. But whenever you add more options, you're inevitably getting some power creep. And what I will note is that with Xanathar's, the majority of power creep came through very powerful subclasses, such as the Hexblade Warlock. We see in Tasha's that subclasses are going to be, again, a major source of power creep. But we also see that the racial options, and with the magic items that boosting spell DC, we're going to see multiple avenues of power creep. And the PCs are going to be more powerful than ever going forward, and I think in a pretty significant way. My sixth main takeaway, and this one has taken a little bit of time to seep in, but we were just talking about subclasses, and everyone is talking about the Twilight Cleric. The Twilight Cleric is loaded with great abilities, but specifically, they get a Channel Divinity option at level 2 that is obviously extremely powerful, providing what seems like a consensus that the Twilight Domain Cleric is broken. Now, I don't disagree with the consensus, but I think as these options are out for a longer period and more players are trying the different options, I actually think that the most powerful subclass in this book isn't the Twilight Cleric. I think there's a sleeper here, and that is in fact the other subclass for Cleric. The Peace Domain gets a level 6 ability that certainly sounds good, but I think it's not immediately apparent just how good it is. I tend to think not just about the numbers. I talk about the numbers a lot on this channel, but I do think a lot about tactics. And I do talk about that in a number of videos, but I am always thinking about it. And I think this is the biggest tactical boost that has ever been provided in this game as a class feature, and by a long shot. Before this time, I would have said it would have been maybe the Echo Knight's Echo, but this is way better than the Echo Knight's Echo, in my opinion. And I do think, as time goes on, I expect more and more players are going to start talking about the Peace Domain as the most broken subclass in this book. Now, I could be wrong. I haven't played it, haven't seen it in play. But my instincts are telling me right now that the Peace Domain Cleric is the most powerful subclass in this entire book. Seventh thing I've been thinking about are the feats. And overall, I think these are well balanced, and I think they give you great new options for players that I don't think are going to break your game. The ones that kind of jump out to me are Fey Touched and Shadow Touched, and to a lesser degree, Telekinetic. These are what we refer to as half feats, and when we talk about half feats, we're talking about feats that provide +1 to an ability score boost, and then something else. The other ability here is really strong, though. We're talking about multiple extra spell slots and spells known, and these are as a half feat feature. Also, there weren't a lot of options for half feats that boosted mental ability scores before, so this provides some really potent options that do. My eighth takeaway are the puzzles, and there's going to be a bit of a spoiler here for the first puzzle presented in the book, so if you don't want to hear it, you'll see timestamps on the timeline of this video. Jump to the next one, because I'm going to be talking about one of the puzzles in enough detail to spoil it for you. But the first time I read Tasha's, I admit, I didn't even read the puzzles. It's a fairly large section of this book, right at the end, and I had read through the book, and I got to the puzzles, kind of saw what it was, and like, I'll look into that later. I have now looked into the puzzles, and there are a lot of sample puzzles here. These are ranked as easy, medium, or hard, and currently I've only read the easy ones, and I have to say, I don't think I would have solved any of them as a player. So I told you there would be a spoiler. So the first puzzle in this book is considered to be an easy puzzle. And the way this puzzle works is we're going to have a bunch of paintings on a wall. And in each painting, there's going to be a certain number of monsters in the painting. And if the players go through the name of the creature by the number of creatures in the painting, they will come to a letter. And if they take all those letters that they find, it'll be gibberish. But if they unscramble them, they will find the name of another creature, and that will be a clue for a future challenge. Easy. I mean, even if the letters weren't scrambled, I think this would be an extremely hard puzzle to solve. It is just a huge leap of faith that your players are going to start to think about the names of the creatures, and maybe the number of creatures in the paintings relates to the letter and the name of the creature. Where do they figure that the players are coming up with these ideas? I mean, even if you get both the provided possible hints here, I don't think that the average player has any chance of coming up with this in any amount of time. And by the way, this all assumes something that probably players shouldn't be assuming, and that's that the common language in D&D is English, and spellings and letters are exactly the same, and I don't think that's an assumption that I would make as a player. But you are required to make that assumption to even have a chance of solving this puzzle. So yeah, I don't get what the designer here was thinking. So I think if I was to use one of these puzzles, I would be looking for ways to make it easier and provide far more hints to the players so they have a chance, because I do think these puzzles are exceedingly difficult, and I've only read the easy ones. The ninth takeaway I have here are the magical tattoos. So a large portion of the magic item section is devoted to magical tattoos, and I was kind of interested to see how this new mechanic was going to work. But it's not really a new mechanic. These are just like any magic item. And I mean, the one thing I thought for sure is at least you won't be able to hand them off to other characters like you can other magic items, but you can. Because if you break attunement, the needle that makes the tattoo reappears, and then you can just give the needle to somebody else, and then they can do the tattoo. So there's not really a new mechanic here at all. The absorbing tattoo could have just as easily been an absorbing amulet. The barrier tattoo could be defensive braziers, etc. Personally, I kind of wish the needle didn't reappear if you broke attunement, so at least there would be a new mechanic. Because this kind of seems like reprints with just a little bit of reflavoring. And I could do the reflavoring on my own. The 10th takeaway here are the group patrons. This is also essentially a reprint, though the specific patrons have changed from Eberron, the Rising of the Last War. These provide the party boosts, maybe in the form of more resources, or extra skill proficiencies, or a safe haven, or some free spellcasting, or multiple ones of those. These patrons may also provide you some quest possibilities. And personally, I think I might wait and see how the power creep of the sourcebook affects challenges before I open up a bunch of free equipment to PCs. And that would be my recommendation to DMs. Keep this on the back burner. Let's let Tasha seep in. Let's try out these new subclasses, these new class options and features, and see how they impact our game. And then we can maybe start working with group patrons and see how those impact our game. Throwing it in all at once is a lot. And speaking of throwing in too much at once, the 11th thing I want to talk about are sidekicks. Yep, we're adding even more things to the battle map. Although I think it's useful to have some non-standard NPC mechanics, I think a DM needs to think very carefully how many creatures the PCs need to take care of in combat. More creatures means more thinking, which means more time between every turn, never mind the extra turns in every round. Combat is already going to be really slowed down. In a post-Tasha's world, sidekicks are going to slow it down even more. That said, I'm glad the rules are there, because if I do want to create a sidekick, that gives me a nice set of rules to do so. But I don't think you should be quick to throw them into your group, especially now, with all these pet options and such. So, the 12th takeaway, let's talk about the supernatural regions, the magical phenomenon, and the natural hazards that show up at the end of the book. These are not a huge section of the book. They were, I will say, a fun read. And I thought some really interesting ideas for DMs who want to put more theme into their settings. This, I think, is a good guideline to get you there. Or if you're running something on the fly and the characters plane shift to somewhere you weren't expecting them to, you have at least a very quick set of guidelines that can give that flavor that you're looking for when you haven't had time to think about things that inspire you. 13th takeaway, they threw session 0 rules in here, and overall it's fine, but I have to say the information I saw here I've all seen before. This has all been out for a while. I don't think this has any new takes on a session 0. That said, I think it's a good idea for this to be officially in print, but buried in a source book, I think that's a pretty odd place to put it. This maybe should have been something that Wizards of the Coast just posted on their website and maybe added to their new printings of the Dungeon Master's Guide, and I think that would have been fine. I don't think this needed to be buried in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. It seems out of place here. And the last section of this book I haven't talked about is Parlaying with Monsters. This is a very short section, and it doesn't really have any unique ideas. I don't think I could have come up on my own, but it does just give you some very quick ideas of if you're parlaying with a monster, what kind of things might be incentives to the monsters to parlay with the players. And I think it's okay, and it's just really short. I don't think there's a lot to say about it. So my final conclusions for this book is, number 1, I think this is a good book, a really good book. As I said, I don't think it's probably as good as Xanathar's, at least that's my initial impression, but there are a lot of really fun ideas here, and some themes that I think are going to make the game fresher for us veterans. Second final conclusion, I do think if you are a DM, you need to be careful not to just jump into everything here. You start your PCs that all have pets, maybe even multiple pets once you get into the familiars that are no longer just for wizards and warlocks anymore. And then you start adding group patrons and sidekicks. I think you're going to find that it becomes too much pretty quickly. So I think that if you are a DM, my recommendation to you, start with the class features and the subclasses. Then maybe go into the racial options. Then maybe look at magic items, spells, etc. Let it seep in and see how it affects your game, and add a little bit more. It's a little bit like cooking. You add a little bit of salt and see how it tastes. You don't dump in a bunch of salt right at once because it might be too much. And if it is, it ruins the dish. And the last of my final conclusions is have your eyes open. That some of the options here are really, really good. Both cleric domains are going to change your game significantly. Custom lineage will be a severe game-changing mechanic as well. Absolutely free roaming ability scores could lead to new must-have racial options. None of these things are going to wreck your game as far as I'm concerned, as long as you have some awareness beforehand. Once you allow these options in your game, in your next session, make sure to look at your challenges and think about how you might need to enhance them if they walk over your first challenge like it's nothing. And as we adjust as DMs, I do think that these will all be fine. I don't think you need to ban anything. We'll see as we go, but I kind of think that this can all be allowed, but we're going to see a different game, and we're going to see groups of PCs stronger than ever before, and just be prepared for that as a DM. And the best way to prepare for it is to adjust the challenges so that players are still challenged by your game. So that is my initial impressions of Tasha's. In the following weeks, I'm going to be going over the options in Tasha's, and I'm going to start with subclasses. The first subclass I'll be talking about is the Order of Scribes Wizard, and that is going to come on my next video, so I hope you'll join me for that. Until then, I'm going to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks, everyone. Talk to you next week.